It's my huge privilege to introduce to you Les Bird, the author of A Small Band of Men, An Englishman's Adventures in Hong Kong's Marine Police. And Les came here in 1976, so he worked for more than 20 years on the front line of the Marine Police. Among other duties, he was involved in helping tens of thousands of Vietnamese refugees to come in on often very ramshackle boats that were never intended to come so far. So we'll be hearing about that. He was also a rural inspector in West Lantau, so a completely different job with Tayo villagers. And he was also involved in very dangerous anti-smuggling work in the era of the Dai Fai, the armour-plated speedboats in the late 80s and early 90s. What he doesn't mention in his book is that Les Bird has been the recipient of multiple bravery awards. I would like to say that he came here in 1976, so let's have a look back at what was happening at that time. The Rolling Stones and Elton John were in the chart, so no difference there. It was also the year that Mao Zedong died, and it was towards the end of the Cultural Revolution, so you imagine that there was quite a hard border at the time with mainland China. Harold Wilson was Prime Minister, and if I can just add on a personal note, Southampton Football Club won the FA Cup that year, the only year. And it was also in Hong Kong. It was also in Hong Kong, one of the years that Murray McElhouse, one of the most, I would say, action governors of our time, and he was reshaping Hong Kong from a sort of manufacturing hub to more of a finance city, and he did many other things at that time. So let's get on to Les Bird, born in Bloxwich in Staffordshire. He could not have been born further away from the sea, but fortunately for him, he was the son of a Royal Navy man who was the son of a Royal Navy man, and used to go to his grandparents on the coast where a love of the sea started. He's got an A-levels in physics, 2 maths, and in 1976 comes to Hong Kong after selling his Ford Escort car. So 1970s Hong Kong, something I haven't mentioned yet. The police were entirely corrupt at the beginning of the 1970s. So, Les, by the time you joined, were you taking bribes?
Easy one to start. Yeah, you're right. It was a time of change. Those of you who were here in 1976 will remember that I think you mentioned Sir Murray McElhouse. He took the government by the scruff of the neck and reinvented it, really, forming the ICAC in 1974. And I was a product of the reinvention, if you like. In the police force, they decided that they wanted fresh middle management to go forward, and they had a massive recruitment drive, both in Hong Kong and in the UK. And they improved conditions of service, salaries, and things like that. So they attracted, I can say, better people. They attract certainly in Hong Kong. They were attracting people who were coming straight from university who wanted to make a career. They made the career interesting, and in the UK they did something similar. So there was a big influx in the mid-70s, and I was on the coattails of that.
So you start off as a trainee inspector at police training school?
I did, yeah. And we spent 9 months, my first 9 months in Hong Kong, straight up the plane, straight into the accommodation block, which is at the back of the photograph there. And we spent 9 months doing drill, PT, learning laws of Hong Kong, police procedures, and the basics of Cantonese. And it was it was interesting in that they were taking people from all backgrounds and throwing them all into the same pot. So it was sort of trying to mold this middle management thing to come out at the end and be trained to be new, if you like, rather than the old ways, and I think actually it worked.
Now, in A Small Band of Men, you describe a friendship that really is lifelong, and certainly during your 20 years of police work, you're going to work a lot with Joe Poon, who's a streetwise Mongkok police. So not the same education as you, but certainly more streetwise from a police perspective when he joins PTS.
Yeah, purely by chance, Joe was in the next door room to me in that accommodation block, and we just hit it off. Him from a completely different background. He was a sergeant in Mongkok before he got promoted, and I'd come straight from the UK. We're totally different people, and in that 9 months, we sort of learned from each other the different peculiarities of our characters and our backgrounds and our cultures. You know, Joe's English at that time wasn't very, very good, and he had difficulty in the classroom. He had to go and learn everything in the training school was in English. The instructors were British, and they followed the British law, so everything was taught in English. And Joe had to go back to his room after each lesson and translate the whole lesson into Chinese, make sure he understood it, then translate it back into English, and for the next day. So he basically had double the workload that we did.
Where were you at the time?
Probably in the officer's mess, actually. No, I was studying as well, of course. Yeah. So I was impressed. You know, from coming from the UK, it was the first time I'd been in an aircraft, by the way, when I came to Hong Kong. And a lot of the guys, the expats, it was their first time away from the UK. So it was a really interesting time.
So you're here in the mid-1970s in Hong Kong. So you describe in A Small Band of Men, we get, you know, the colour of, well, you can imagine a bunch of young men, mostly young men, at police training school at that time, going up Brick Hill and down, and also going out during the John Travolta era. Now, once you finish, it's quite odd doing an interview with a former superintendent. You kind of think you're going to get into trouble at any moment. But so after PTS, you spend 9 months there, and then you have your first boss.
Yeah. So after leaving the training school, I went directly to the Marine Police. What you see there is Police Launch Number 1. That was where I went. That's just a training exercise that's going on in the background. And my boss was Don Bishop. He was a chief inspector, and he was the head of the eastern waters of Hong Kong. And he was a bit of an ogre. Some thought he was a bully.
What did he look like?
He was not so tall, about 5'10", but he was about as wide as he was tall and thick as he was wide, so he was practically a cube. He had a large bowling ball of a head which was totally shaven and no neck. And people would see him, other officers would see him coming and instinctively turn and go the other direction because he was actually quite a frightening person. So he was my first boss, and it was rather odd actually, because in those days the senior officers in Marine, they were all from the era of post-Second World War. They were all in their 50s, so you can imagine. Like the Commissioner of Police, Roy Henry, he'd been in the British Army during the Second World War, and then he'd become a colonial police officer, and so he served in Malaya. Then he went to Fiji, then he came to Hong Kong. So there was like these journeyman bosses that we had. And they were all characters, and they were all eccentric, and you never knew whether they were joking or whether they were actually serious. So being 9 months at the training school and being rigidly trained in this and this, then coming out and having a boss that was rather eccentric, it was rather odd for me because I didn't know whether it was right or not to
And alcohol was big, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Off duty, he expected me when we were off duty to go drinking with him. It was part. I became his bagman and his batman, if you like, or his assistant. And he owned you. That was the way it was in the 70s. It was sort of an afterthought from the Second World War, the way it was in the war, I suppose. And he owned my life, And
But actually, when push came to shove, I mean, we're giving one impression of Don Bishop. The other thing was that when it came to danger, when it came to being a professional,
oh, absolutely. Chalk and cheese, bipolar. I don't know what the common term is. Totally professional. When the chips were down, totally reliable. On my very first trip, we encountered a freighter that was drifting in the Taton Channel, which is the eastern entrance to Victoria Harbour, and this freighter was not answering any radio signals, and it was very, very thick fog, and it was just drifting.
like the Marie Celeste.
Yeah. We called it the Flying Dutchman, actually, on the day. He arranged an armed boarding of this boat. Now, at the training school, I was told that 99% of my career would be doing nothing and just waiting for something to happen, and 1% would be manic and very, very dangerous. And there I was on my first trip. They were handing out guns and putting rope ladders up the side of this drifting freighter. And it was a case of, right, well, you go up. I mean, he was amazing. And from that moment, I had total trust in him. Very, very difficult to work with, but I knew that if the push come to the shove, he would know what to do.
So that was on PL1 when you first start. So so that you've got this dramatic, really, start to your career. Certainly using firearms all of a sudden, or using them outside school. And one of your first tasks, then, as we were saying about it being the mid-1970s and communist China as it was the freedom swimmers. Yeah,
it was again, short shock treatment for me, straight out of the training school. And our patrol area included Mears Bay. Mears Bay is the body of water between northern Hong Kong and the Chinese coast. And it was a favorite place where people would try in those days to try and swim across. Although it was 3 miles, it was a 3-mile swim. And the majority of those kids were teenagers. I mean, the average age was about 18, I think.
So how did you feel?
The first time, you look at these guys and you think they're trying to come to Hong Kong to start a new life, which is what I'd just done. So my job was to catch them and send them back. But it was doubly difficult for me because, or rather for everyone on board, because the majority of guys who work for me were a lot older. And in the 1940s, 1950s, their fathers and their uncles and their aunts had come to Hong Kong in the very same way. So they were more challenged than I was, I guess. So it was it really wasn't a case of arresting these people and sending them back. It was a case of pulling them out of the water and giving them something to eat. And a lot of the guys used to bring old clothes, their own stuff, and give it to these people before they had to go back to China.
Yeah, you describe in A Small Band of Men, these poor kids coming on and they're dripping, and they probably haven't eaten for a number of days. They're tired. They're in no fit state to be undertaking that, if they can even swim, or they're just trying to hold on to anything that floats. I mean, it's a very poignant part of your book, and you, as you say, this conflict, because they're going back to Sha Tao Kok and across the border the following day. Now, so this is you on what's that, an inflatable?
It's called a Jumbo Zodiac. It's an inflatable boat, and we used to use these in Deep Bay on the western side of Hong Kong. Deep Bay because it's very shallow, of course. So we use these, Cantonese humour. We use these boats to look for the illegal immigrants who used to try and wade or swim across. But you're right, a lot of them couldn't swim, so it was doubly dangerous for them. There were all sorts of hazards, if you like. First of all, a lot of them couldn't swim, so they would use plastic pillows or car tires to come across, which if they lost, of course, they would drown. And the other problem was the vehicular traffic. The vessels going across the bay would, sometimes they would get churned up in the propellers, and then in September, October, which of course is shark season, if you didn't know when you go swimming, September, October, a lot of them got eaten. And in this shot there, I'm just getting out of that jumbo Zodiac. I'm actually standing on some deflated inflatable stuff that they've come across on. Those are the illegal immigrants just to the right of the photograph. And I'm carrying in my hand a night vision device. That's something that allowed us to look into total darkness and be able to see quite clearly. It relies on ambient light.
Now, you actually were in correspondence recently with one that got past you.
Yes. In 1980, I was, this photograph is taken in 1980 in Deep Bay. I was actually in command of the anti-illegal immigration of that area. And by chance, a friend's father told me that he came across Deep Bay on the 24th of October, 1980. And I was able to check, and I was on duty that day. And I said to my friend, if I'd have caught your dad, you wouldn't be here now. Which is true.
Is everybody able to hear us clearly at the back there? Yes?
Yeah. I'm getting signs you can't hear me, which I'm moving this around. Okay,
great. Now, we move from illegal immigrants and this was mostly which sort of areas when you were doing the IIs?
Well, it was in the bays. It was Mears Bay in the east and Deep Bay in the west, which is the two border areas.
And now we're off to West Lantau.
We are, yes. There's my house.
Oh, this so annoys me. This is the Tayo Heritage Hotel now, but used to be Les's house. I'm going to save you the bother. That top floor used to be his quarters. So if any of you are stuck in sort of 500 square foot flats, this was how the inspector of West Lantau lived.
Well, it's perk of the job, I guess. I wouldn't know why not. It was busy. Sort of. You can't get over this, can you? No. We did
fireplaces and everything.
We did a radio program out there, and I had to point out that to rent. I stayed there recently, and the cost of staying in the hotel for one night is more than my salary was monthly salary in 1976.
Now, it was, you've described to me how there was very little crime there, but you had quite a considerable staff under you, and tell us about what sort of duties you had.
The top half was my quarter, and the bottom half was a working police station, but we were responsible for the whole of Western Lantau. In fact, it was the biggest geographical police division at the time. So I had the responsibility for Lantau Peak, Polin Monastery, all the villages around the northern Lantau area.
Like the village of Tung Chung.
Yeah, the fishing village of Tung Chung with a population of 200 in 1976. And the barren island of Cheklak Kok, which had nothing on it. It was just trees and scrub. So it was a very, very rural existence. It was a very, very rural type of job. But it was interesting because being responsible for all those villages, I have to point out that the remoteness of Tayo at the time, there was no road, finished road between the west and the east, so we were totally cut off. And the only communication I had with the outside world was one land telephone line, and my telephone was a big black Bakelite thing. It really was like World War I. You'd pick up the thing, and there was a trumpet to speak into, and it was a case of hello, and can you hear me? And which it didn't work if it rained, which was I used to use to my advantage if the boss was looking for me. So we really were cut off, and I had a staff of about 50 police officers, and we were left to our own devices. And a dispatch would arrive every day in a leather case with memorandums for things for me to do, and then I would have to type up, or someone else would type for me, of course, the replies, and it was a communication like that. We really were sort of thrown out to the... actually, Tayo Police Station is nearer Macau than it is the Star Ferry. So, you know, we really were...
I think in the 1860s there was a massive pirate attack on Tayo. I don't think that was necessarily a problem when you were there.
The actual police station was built as an anti-pirate station in 1902.
Great big thick walls, but you didn't actually use the cells. So what were you, what were your main jobs as a sort of a village rep, really, in a way?
Yeah, absolutely. Can I just show you the next slide, because I'm going to annoy you even more. That slide on the left...
Did you hear that collective
the top floor was my quarter, and that's my corridor. That's where I lived. So tough times. I was a rural police officer. So the idea was I would go on foot with my men around the coast of Lantau, and I would pick a village which I would be responsible for and visit it once a month. And the whole village would come out, and there'd be a village hall and a headman and a committee, and they would tell me their problems, and I would take notes, and then I would go back to the police station. But because I was the only Hong Kong government rep that actually did that, because it was so remote, instead of crime, I was given things like, well, the school roof is leaking, we need something to do about that, so I'd make a note. And something else, and then I would go back to the station. I would write to the various relevant government departments, and then they would send someone out to fix whatever it was. And then next month I'd go back and I would check, and they would tell me if they had it done, or if it was fixed or not.
Now, what was the privacy level for an inspector at Tayo?
None. Everyone. Well. Everyone knew who I was, obviously, because I was, one of the very few Westerners living on the island at the time, on Lantau, or certainly the west of Lantau. And the police station is 1 mile further on from the village, so I would have to walk through the village to go anywhere. So they would know when I was in and when I was out, and who was visiting me and who was leaving and what time. So, yeah. It's sort of, they could probably make a TV show of it now.
Now, you also, so
you move on.
Yes, of course. With Tayo, we have the famous ferry. You were also involved in cutting ribbons also as a government dignitary.
Yes, that's actually me with the village elders opening the Sun Key Bridge. The Sun Key Bridge is the bridge to the north of the bridge that's in there now. The bridge that replaced the Tayo ferry is an awful thing. But if you go into the depths of Tayo and go north, you'll find a rickety old wooden bridge called the Sun Key Bridge. It was opened in 1979, and that's me being invited to cut the ribbon.
Now, were you the only Westerner living in Tayo?
No. That's Father Giovanni. He was the other Caucasian, a white man who lived in Tayo, and we were the only two, and we formed quite a close friendship, as you would imagine. The only problem, first of all, about him, he was a priest in China in the 1940s, and he was imprisoned because of his beliefs, and he spent 4 years in prison. And after he was released in 1949, he made his way to Tayo, and he was the priest of Tayo ever since. So he'd been there over 20 years when I got there. The thing was, he was fluent in Mandarin. He could speak reasonable Cantonese, but his English was not very good at all. And I don't.
He spoke Italian, didn't he?
No. Well, this is it. So we sometimes tried to converse in Cantonese, believe it or not. Now, living in a village of Chinese people, when we went for dinner in an evening and we tried this, the other people in the restaurant would slightly encroach on us to listen. So if someone got anything wrong, there would be a lot of advice from behind, And occasionally, when we got a sentence right, there'd be a round of applause. So dinner was never dull in Tayo.
And he was an Inter Milan supporter, was he?
He was, yes, Inter Milano. Yeah.
Now, it's interesting when you think about where you were in Tayo, the Bakelite phone, because just something I want to touch briefly on is that when we think about coastal navigation now, it's satellite, it's Wi-Fi. What did you have at your disposal, and what did you learn?
After leaving the training school, the police training school, I had to go to the marine training school, and I learned Morse code, semaphore, believe it or not. That's how to signal people with flags, as you probably know.
So give us one then.
England expects. Yeah. So, you know, there was no GPS, there was no Wi-Fi, there was no mobile phone. So we were taught basic navigation, to how to go out in a boat into the middle of the ocean and find your way around.
So you really also had to judge the weather?
Weather was another massive, because Hong Kong with the typhoons was going to play a huge part in my life going forwards, yeah. So
while you're on Lantau, I mean, as you say, a lot of what you did was on foot. So you would sort of troop from village to village and get to know those very well. But tell us what happened one day when you were again on foot.
You're building up to this one. At that time, in 1979, there was, as you know, there was a big influx of Vietnamese refugees, and that turned people smuggling. And you probably have heard the names of the ships, the Hui Fong and the Skylark. A lot of people don't know what the third people smuggling vessel was, and that's this one. That's the Sen On. The Sen On came in on Saturday afternoon, May the 26th, 1979. And I was right the other side of that hill when it came on, when it beached. It came into Hong Kong, and the master and the crew, rather than stay on board, had left it in Macau. They'd gone ashore in Macau with their gold, and they'd left the refugees to drive the ship, which they didn't know how to do. They could steer it. So they steered towards Lantau and then beached it on a beach called Lo Kei Wan. This is Lo Kei Wan Beach.
So they literally directed the ship into the coast?
Yes. So they didn't know how to stop it. So they drove the ship straight up the beach at full speed. And it looked ridiculous, to be honest. And by chance, I was the other side of that hill in my Jeep, and I got a radio call saying there's something going on the other side of the hill. You need to find out what it is. So I scrambled up the back of that hill and then down through that foliage. There was nothing. I was on my own, and there was nothing. There was no a path or anything. So I came tumbling out at the bottom, and there were 1,403 people.
So what did you say?
You're all under arrest. Don't move. Well, what else would you say? But my worry was I didn't know that the crew, the people smugglers, had actually left. So as far as I was concerned, they were mixing in with this lot. And so it was actually an interesting half an hour before reinforcements. Obviously behind this ship were a flotilla of marine police launches chasing it, telling it to stop. And within about half an hour, I'd got a lot of people on the beach to help me. And by chance, one of them was carrying a Polaroid camera, one of those old Polaroids. And I took this. It's really, really faded. But you can see how the ship is rammed into the beach, and they're just climbing off. There's a sort of a ladder thing on the side, and they're climbing down. And that guy in the foreground there is just turning around and looking at me, wondering what I'm doing, I suppose. But I managed to snap that one, just as it was basically, in the middle of the whole thing.
One thing we haven't mentioned is that A Small Band of Men, the actual book, derives from a collection of, or a box of photographs that Les carried around for decades from house to house, and Mrs. Bird very wisely told him to keep as they were moving. They are really, when you were on duty, when you had the opportunity, he had a camera in his knapsack and would basically, and we're very grateful that you did, because it's really history in the making, all of your different duties. This was a Polaroid. I'm so glad. I mean, it's a superb restoration job on there, but I'm so glad that your camera most of the time wasn't a Polaroid, because we can actually see them much more clearly.
Yeah, this next shot is what was going on at the time in Hong Kong. You can see it was ships like this coming into Hong Kong every day. And after I left Tai-O, I moved on to launch-going duties. And for the next 10 years, I was dealing with the influx of Vietnamese refugees, and this is a typical boat.
So you actually had hundreds coming in a day?
Yeah, I mean, there would be 10, 20 boats a day with up to 1,000 people a day. In 1979, 1980, there was I think there was 68,000 in one 12-month period came in. So we had to deal with these, and it was a big issue for us because we didn't have enough resources. So the Marine Police had to borrow boats. So we borrowed boats from the Marine Department, Customs and Excise, Immigration, the Fisheries Department, and we put people on. So we had this whole flotilla of government boats that were sent out to try and stop meat, if you like, because they weren't illegal immigrants as such. They were coming to be rescued. So our first job was to look after them, and the first thing that we always did, of course, was the medical concerns.
So so you'd have young children, often malnutrition and dehydration, also cholera. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, these guys had come over 1,000 miles, and this is actually quite a big boat. They were often much, much smaller. So you can imagine 1,000 miles with your family of 2 little kids, and they'd run out of food, most of them, so and hadn't had anything to drink for a while. So medical concerns were really, really high, and we weren't fully equipped for that with equipment. It took a year or two to actually come to terms with all that sort of thing.
Are you in touch with any of them?
Yes. Since the book, I'll just move the slide on.
That's my favourite, actually.
Since the book, I've been in touch with probably about a dozen of the former refugees. I've been able to help a few of them find out what happened. A lot of them are in their 40s and 50s now, so they'd be little kids of 5, 6, 7, 8 years old at the time, who have no recollection of what happened to them. And through the records that I've been able to find, I've been able to give them photographs and written records of where their boat landed and what time and what happened to them in those first few days. And it's been interesting for me because they all live in sort of Canada or the US, and they're all professionals, and and they've got that 5-year blank in their lives where they don't remember anything.
You would have written all their names down, particularly the Senon, as they came through.
Absolutely, there's one guy, I might digress quickly. There's one guy who was a soldier in the South Vietnamese army, and he went underground after the war, and he managed to get out on the Senon, and he and I were standing on that beach at the same time, and he's now writing his memoirs, and every week I get this email of, what do you think about this? Is this right? Is this, so he's in his 70s. So it's quite an interesting relationship. We both went our own different ways, and we both came from different backgrounds, and the communication's been very, very interesting.
As we've seen with the Vietnamese, and also to a certain extent with, even though you were sending them back, the welfare of the freedom swimmers as they came in. So your job actually within the Marine Police was incredibly diverse, because you've got the law and order aspect, but you've also got the welfare and when a disaster occurred or anything like that. But you also did anti-terrorism training. The book cover, of course, gives it away. More rope ladders.
Damn ladders. So I in 1988, I was promoted to Chief Inspector, and I took over the unit that became the Government Maritime Counter-Terrorist Unit, the SBU, and we worked with other agencies from around the world to form a unit that would respond if there was a hijacking of a ship in Hong Kong. So it was all Captain Phillips type stuff, which you can see there on the stern of the Repulse Bay.
So I've learned that the stern is the back.
Sorry, yeah.
No, not sorry. I'm the one never know my shipping terms, but the stern is at the back, which is apparently a blind spot.
Yes, it is. And you always attack a ship from the back. These Somali pirates come up the side and really don't know that, because on an ocean-going ship, the radar scanner always gets interrupted by the funnel or something behind it, and you can't see a boat coming up behind it, which is why we used to do this to some incoming boats without telling the skipper. Then we'd go up onto the bridge and knock on the door, and he would have a heart attack.
So that was anti-terrorism training. Now, this would move you on to, in the late 1980s, early 1990s, of course, you've got an increase in wealth in China, and with an increase in wealth comes an increased disposable income for luxury goods, including cars.
Yeah. So cross-border smuggling became a massive issue in the 1988 and 1989. With the high wealth in China, supply and demand not being able to meet. So people were putting in orders. The syndicates in China and Hong Kong joined forces in order to do basically smuggling from Hong Kong into China for whatever was required and couldn't be supplied by in the normal way, including vehicles.
Yeah, so Mercedes-Benz, police won't like this stat, but I quite like this stat as a journalist. In 1990, more than 660 luxury vehicles, mostly Mercedes-Benz, were nicked without trace from Hong Kong. And a lot of them, you reckon, went on armour-plated Dai Fai. So that's, from a journalistic perspective, that's fascinating. But what was coming back the other way?
If those of you who were in Hong Kong in the late 1980s will remember, there was a lot of very, very serious armed robberies in Central, in Tsim Sha Tsui, using AK-47s, balaclavaed robbers, shooting at everybody that got in the way. And those guys were brought in from China to do that, and the arms and ammunition was smuggled in. So it was doubly dangerous, not only trying to stop these guys go out with all their contraband. It was also very, very dangerous for us to try and stop them coming in, because you never really knew who or what was going to greet you if you caught them.
So these guys would come in down the Tolo Channel, and you'd be out there on rigid inflatables, as far as I understand. So this is actually where the small band of men comes from.
Yes, the title of the book, The Small Band of Men, comes from my unit, this unit. I was with the unit for nearly 4 years, 4 years. And my small band of men were tasked onto this duty, and that's what we did.
So can you describe a night at Tolo?
Yeah, well, first of all, the reason why the smuggling syndicate used to use Tolo is because it's a narrow channel, which means it's always going to be calm water, and speedboats like calm water. And it's also very, very dark, and there's a lot of rural loading places, little jetties, and which are in the middle of nowhere. So they would steal a car in Hong Kong. They would drive it within probably under an hour up to whatever the loading point was. They would drive a mobile crane, pick it up, put it into the waiting Dai Fai, and then straight up the Tolo Channel and across Meuse Bay to wherever they were going. And it was our job to figure out where this was going to happen and then try and stop it in the safest possible way we could.
Now, you've actually got tonight some, is it security footage that's actually never been seen in public?
Surveillance, not security.
Oh yeah, I got him. 1, 2, 3 on the 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Oh!
Those are Dai Fais coming in into Tolo Channel. That's about 7 o'clock in the evening. It's taken from a RAF helicopter, surveillance helicopter. These guys are loading TV sets, which I don't think will probably work when they get them.
What about my warranty?
These are a couple of speedboats who are about to take off. When we were looking, when we were at work, we would wear night vision goggles, and this is exactly what we will be seeing. This is in total darkness, remember. So what you see in the next two or three minutes is all in total darkness. They can't see where they're going. That's a stolen vehicle coming in. This syndicate was loading a couple of cars when they got interrupted by my unit, which you will see in a second. You'll see a car being winched. Here it comes. This is a different car. So this one would be destined for the Dai Fai. It swings round. Here it is. Those are the syndicate, and then they suddenly realize they've been rumbled, and they're off.
So they just leave the car there?
Yeah, leave it, yeah. So these are the two Dai Fais that were going to take the vehicles. Now, you have to remember this is total darkness, so what you see now is people driving at 50, 60, 70 miles an hour in total darkness. So stuff happens.
And that's you?
Yeah, I'm driving that, yeah.
Now, what did you have at you would actually try and disorientate them as well. So what did you have at your disposal?
It was flares. It was mostly flares. So you put a flare up and they would be blinded and wouldn't know which way to turn. And you could see them.
Because, I mean, with 5 outboard engines, what sort of speed could they go at?
Well, a fully, I don't know, I seem to remember 90 knots. Although some dispute that, but this is a chase, by the way, in darkness.
And that's a fish farm?
Yeah, he didn't see the fish farm. And, wait, don't ruin the punchline. He didn't see the fish farm. Here he goes. Oops.
But the dog saw him.
The dog saw him, yeah.
So that's the Dai Fai era, which, yes, was also incredibly dangerous, as you say. Now, aside from the work that you did, you actually lost a man, or it was, there was death involved in the job.
Yeah, I made light of that, didn't I? But it was incredibly dangerous, as you can imagine. And there were deaths. I lost an officer, young chap. And a lot of the smugglers were killed as well. You can see what was happening. They were disorientated. They would panic and they would drive into things basically, and they would career into each other. A lot of the smugglers who died were as a result of one Dai Fai hitting another and not seeing it, or everyone going in different directions at full speed.
Now, we were saying earlier about the fact that you did some disaster, or you would be brought out very quickly in the wake of a disaster with the Marine Police, and you were actually at the site of 4 plane crashes. Which one is this?
This is the 1988 CAAC Trident crash at Kai Tak. I mean, I was at so many air crashes because Kai Tak, of course, was a finger pointing into the harbour and then out east. So quite often, if there was an accident, it would end up as a maritime issue. And these are my guys here in the foreground.
So what's happened to the cockpit there?
Well, the cockpit is broken, as you can see, and is underwater. And what we're trying to do there is get the cockpit crew out. All the passengers were evacuated, and the cabin crew were evacuated, but the cockpit crew had locked themselves inside, and they were underwater. And the diving crew there are just arriving to try and get them out. But we didn't get them out in time.
So your career is 1976 to 1997. So we've seen sort of various aspects of what he was doing out. So most of your job, particularly from trainee inspector to inspector and upwards, onto chief inspector, and I don't know all the ones. I know you end up superintendent or commander. But a lot of what you did, you're not a desk person at all. You wouldn't have suited accountancy, for example. But towards the end of your career, you're building up to the handover. Yeah. And we've had 20 years of also issues of localization. You've got these Chinese and expat police working alongside. You've got a team, a mixed team, and yet all of you are thinking, we're building up to the handover. And with comes 1992. If you can say who we're looking at there, who I'm sure you'll all recognise.
The new governor in 1992 did a whirlwind tour of Hong Kong. I think it was about a week, and I got chosen from a cast of millions to look after him for a day, and that's us on. Looking towards China. I think you're saying, what's that over there? That's China. Right, okay. So I got to brief him on all the border issues during his whirlwind tour. And as you can see on the right, I'm with another person, which you probably recognise.
Yeah, so what was Maggie like?
Baroness Thatcher, you mean? Yeah. She was, well, I was told that she's a stickler for formalities and timetables, and everything was, we had an operational order for a visit, and everything was minute by minute. She will do this, and then you will do this, and that. But she stepped out of the car and saw all these Dai Fais racked up alongside and just marched over to them. And then
so some of these speedboats have been confiscated, yeah?
Yeah, and I went with her, followed by the entourage, who were all looking at their watches. So for the next 10, 15 minutes, she wanted to know the horsepower, the weight, the power ratios, and how they steer and things like this. She was very, very interested in all the technical aspects of these big boats. It's quite an interesting chat.
So your career went up until the handover. Now, are you still in touch with the guys?
Yes, here they are. There's some of the guys I work with from way back, and we are still very much in touch. I'm still very lucky to have this sort of smaller band now, but of old friends. So yeah, we keep in touch, and it's really, really nice.
Thank you very much for tonight. So that's a small band of men, Mr. Les Bird.